Salam, hello, peace to you all. I'm Adnan Hussein, historian of the medieval Mediterranean and Islamicate world. Welcome to you all to this new series that I'm really excited to be developing on the divine names, the words we use to call upon God. And of course, this isn't just a tradition that's available within Islam, the Muslim tradition of spirituality, Sufism, but is something that is available in many different religious traditions, particularly Judaism and Christianity. And I wanted to start a series to discuss this, both from within the tradition as I know and understand it, but also with more universal perspective or maybe that isn't quite the way to say it, but to be available and useful to people both within the tradition and without. And for that reason, I thought it would be really exciting to develop this in tandem with really a longtime friend of mine that I recently had the opportunity to reconnect with. And we've been developing this project and this series together. And so I want to introduce Dr. Marc Applebaum. How are you, Marc?
Great. Really happy to be here. Happy to kick this off with you. And the exploration of the names together with you feels just like a very timely and a wonderful opportunity.
Yes, well, I'm so grateful for your enthusiasm for the project, and already just speaking with you about it has been very fulfilling for me. And so I'm hoping that the dialogue that continues as we explore the divine names, Asma al-Husna, as they're known in Arabic, in the Islamic tradition, the Quran itself says God has these Asma al-Husna, these beautiful names, is the literal translation of it, that this might be a resource for people. But you alluded to something that I think is worth setting a bit of a context before we even talk about what are the divine names and how one would approach them and what we're hoping to derive from them in terms of some understanding and benefit, is just to say that it does seem to me quite urgent to be doing this at this time, both with you together, but also given the state of the world. I've been particularly feeling that with all the pain and trauma, psychically, physically, and so many other ways in the world, and of course those effects that they have on us internally, and being even more aware of myself and my own kind of hangups and limitations and feelings and emotions, how to deal with things like a world that's so broken, and also even thinking really about what I consider really a shock to what it means to be human. And in a way, something I think we'll talk much more about. I think the exploration of the divine names can and is, and at least for us, is also about trying to be fully human and achieve those potentials. But we're seeing at the same time why this is so important, because what's at stake right now, with what's happening. I'm wondering how you feel as well about that. And if you have any reflections on, why it might be at this moment important to undertake some kind of spiritually renewing or fortifying and even challenging, but at least, some kind of spiritual labor and exploration, at this time.
Yeah, and I think that question spans everything from psychology to ethics to spirituality. I think that this question, I liked how you framed this in terms of what does a more complete humanity look like, personally and in principle. And I think all of that is implied in relating to the names. I really, I'll come back to that question in a minute about the specific timing. I just wanted to say what I value most about framing it as more complete humanity is that I think that we may get very specific we may refer to very specific texts in Sufism or Islamic tradition in particular, and both you and I have a personal, scholarly and personal connection to those traditions. And I hope that the way we engage with this is accessible to anyone who's interested in that question of larger humanity, whether that's through a specific religious tradition or through a more humanistic engagement that isn't necessarily committed within a particular theology. The question of complete human beings should be relevant for all of us, guys. I guess where I'm going with that. And that's how I
Absolutely.
read through both of those.
Absolutely. I think that's a great point.
Right.
I just wanted to also underscore that among the challenges, and maybe you have other things you want to add, is that during this time, it's very difficult, it seems, or to be human, or rather, we're witnessing really the kind of undermining with like such cruelty and the indignities that humanity and human beings are being subjected to, and that's even without taking into account the world as it has been increasingly immiserated by economic suffering, poverty, the impending ways in which what it has come to mean to be human has been destroying nature and the planet and imperiling existence of life in this biosphere. These are all, and transhumanism and AI. I just
Yeah.
feel this is a moment where we really have
You're
to
reading my mind. We're on the precipice of some of the most powerful people in the world pushing toward transhumanism
right.
without us even fully paying attention to what human means in the first place. Maybe even dispensing with it, actually,
That's
in order
right.
to
Like it
rush.
was a terrible inconvenience to actually try and uphold some sense of the human as a universal kind of
Yeah,
category. So why
and
not, why not abandon it?
and to look at the names is all to look at the names and to contemplate the names is also to contemplate the sources of value, core values. When we talk about justice, any of the uh, truthfulness, justice, mercy. I mean, these are also core human values. So we're right in the middle of that when we turn to the names, I think.
Yeah, that's a great point as well. And I think we're going to end up exploring a lot more about that relationship between the qualities and characteristics that are shared in some sense between names of God, divine names, and those attributes being attributes that also can describe some element of human characteristics. That's going to be, of course, a key issue. It just reminds me a little bit of two different hadith that seem to bear on this. One of which is, man arafa nafsu, qad arafa nafsuhu arafa rabbahu, who knows oneself knows one's Lord, or creator, which suggests some special kind of way in which self-knowledge is connected with a much more universalist and cosmological understanding. And another one that is a hadith Qudsi, where in this
Yeah,
tradition of reports that have been traced back to Prophet Muhammad's words. In this case, they're a unique and special category of those reports where voices God's self-description or something God says about God, so
Mhm.
which is that I am as my servant or worshiper imagines or thinks of me. The word is dhan in Arabic, which is an interesting word. It's like it's not what is true. It's not like an well, it's interesting. Is it an ontological statement? It's really just authorizing in some ways the sense that the human understanding of the divine is somehow real, at least for the human being. So but it's God's permission to say, how you understand me is how I will be to you. So these names are so important as a vehicle for
Yeah,
how we might relate, to something
yeah,
outside and inside ourselves.
yeah. And I think, well, uh, man arafa rabbuhu. So arafa, I often point out to people, it's different from conceptual knowledge. It's personal acquaintanceship, right? So we're really talking, so who knows himself knows his Lord is really like, I mean, at least this would be more of an Akbari Sufi commentary on Arafah in that hadith, is it's really an in-person knowing of the divine is the way I would read that. Not just a merely conceptual contemplation of ideas about God.
That's a great point. I think that gets us to thinking a little bit about what are some of the approaches we might take. I don't know if we're ready to dive into that, but I did want to say that there is also a whole spiritual and devotional context where the names are important, not just for their conceptual meanings, possibly, that I hope we'll also get a chance to explore to some extent, but as you're saying, also how they're experienced, their vocalization, their sound. There is a tradition that in Muslim devotional culture that the Asma al-Husna were recorded in one version of them in a hadith that really encourages their recitation. Memorize them, recite them, and pronounce them, and that there are spiritual benefits for the Muslim believer to actually know these names, recite them, and remember them. And of course, the word that's being used in the hadith about them is their invocation, through dhikr. That is the word remembering, which is, as both of us will hasten to ensure everyone thinks of, not just it as a cognitive act, but as something crucial in a spiritual performance as a practice of remembering God and what that means. So the names are a vehicle for that sort of practice.
Yeah, I think well said. I mean, I think tadhakkara, or remembrance, as you well know, it's not the word for just rote memory. It's the word for, it would be a different word, right, in Arabic. It's the word for bringing to mind what matters most, or what's most important, recollecting what's important. And so we could really look at, we're really opening up the whole book right now, aren't we?
Yeah.
We could spend, in the future, we may end up spending quite amount of time just on what zikr or tadhakkara is really about, and the different levels of meaning, because I think everything we're going to be talking about, and I do think this way psychologically as well. I should probably say to people that my background is in phenomenological psychology. And we'll get maybe perhaps later to what that's all about, what that means. But so I tend to think, even in a sense developmentally, about what the different levels of meaning are of remembrance. So that's a teaser, maybe.
It's a teaser. Maybe we should think a little bit about it, about the method. But before diving into that, just to say that traditionally speaking, there have been 99 names and a hidden, name, the 100th. And also, there are different traditions of what those 99 are. There is the classic hadith that I mentioned that has formed the basis of a lot of the devotional literature and practice around recitation, memorizing, and then remembrance of the dhikr of the 99 names. But there are many more than those 99 listed, features or qualities, attributes listed in the Quran, and of course, that's only been a traditional number of devotional purpose, but of course they're limitless, and that'll be also something interesting to encounter, why certain ones have been specified or become important, and how to engage with those, but at the same time opening up the fact that these are really limitless. And we may look at other religious traditions as well, in
Yeah.
Judaism, Christianity,
Hmm.
for how attributes of God or names of God, and the two, we always think of them as synonyms. Maybe there's distinctions there also to even think of, but how those are present and available in other traditions. But what we'll start with, I think, is really approaching um, these traditional ones, even though, as I said, there's variation there,
Hmm.
um, and how they've been accessed
Hmm.
meaningfully within Muslim spirituality in the traditions of Sufism. And I think, especially as you were pointing out, there is a strand of Sufi mystical theosophy that
Hmm.
has very deeply developed an understanding of the importance of the relationship between the divine attributes and the human fulfillment
Yeah.
spiritually. The Akbarian tradition associated with Muhyiddin Ibn al-Arabi, and we'll be wanting to explore that.
Yeah.
Perhaps
Yeah.
you might tell us a little bit more about how and why you've engaged with it and how it relates to what you were just speaking about in terms of psychology and phenomenology, phenomenological approaches to them.
Yeah. So my engagement in phenomenology and Akbari Sufism, both are both are about both are about 25, 30 years of the past part of my life, and both of those investigations and practices, right? So as I was um, back in the 90s beginning to study phenomenological psychology, and I'll say a little bit about what that is, I was simultaneously engaging personally and secondarily in a scholarly way in the study of Akbarian Sufism. So, so it's and the so phenomenology. To start with, I'll say just a few words. It's this is a more than 100-year tradition in philosophy, founded by Edmund Husserl, most famously. But other figures who've really influenced me are Maurice Merleau-Ponty, Eugen Fink, Levinas, another one, Paul Ricoeur. But it's a tradition in philosophy that aims to ground human understanding in a more reliable and essential way by setting aside presuppositions through theoretical assumptions and going back to lived experience as much as possible to discern uh, what are the essential or least variant constituents of particular types of experiences, particular types of lived experiences. If we go deeper into this in the future, I can get even more concrete with that. But phenomenological psychology could investigate everything from the experience of becoming a parent for the first time, for example, to the experience of praying and feeling oneself answered by God. So, in order to do that, phenomenology, to investigate those kind of experiences, phenomenology gathers descriptions from people who say, yes, I've had that experience. I became a parent. I can tell you all about it. Or, yes, I did have an experience where I prayed and felt that I was answered by God. The phenomenologist adopts an attitude of, what I want to understand is the meaning, the essential meaning of the experience. I'm not trying to validate empirically, did God really answer you, as if I could validate that anyway, right? So the empirical part is set aside in order to examine the meaning of the experience and really carefully go into the description of the experience and find out what are the most essential meanings of the experience, not just for this one individual person, but more broadly about what's involved in praying and being answered by God. So clear so far? So far, so good.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
Yeah.
it coordinates perfectly with something very important in Sufi literature, Sufi discourse, which is, despite the fact that there is an enormous amount written by Sufis
Mhm.
themselves, that they always say, yes, but you can't really know any of this without experiencing it. And you have to, have the dhawq, the tasting
Right.
of these spiritual realities to really understand. So there's something like conceptual knowledge, which
Hmm.
theologians discuss, and of course there's a huge body. We're not really going to delve into that with seriousness, but of course it'll come up at certain points. But there's a huge body of theological literature about the questions of these divine attributes. How do you reconcile anthropomorphic characteristics with the nature of a transcendent divine creator who's different from the world that has been created, and how do we reconcile that? And so there's very complicated discourse around these kinds of questions. You might call that conceptual knowledge, but even they are aware that there's a difference between the name of a thing and the thing itself, and the way you understand a thing and the essence of that. And likewise, of course, in mystical or spiritual experience, there's a difference between knowing things about God or about
Hmm.
yourself
Hmm.
even, and experiencing those things. And so that phenomenological perspective, that is a serious and disciplined philosophical method, is one
Hmm.
that actually seems to coordinate fairly well with the discourse of Sufism, that valorizes the experiences themselves and knowing through experience in life, and through spiritual encounters and awarenesses and realizations that may come to someone in whatever form those might take. And I guess
Yeah.
the Akbarian component, what's interesting, and maybe we should talk a little bit about Ibn al-Arabi's thoughts and ideas to some extent, as they may bear on this, are particularly valuable for conceptualizing experience. So I see it as very closely related with phenomenology, because it is, again,
Hmm.
uh, some attempt to reflect on the meaning of knowing through experience. So it's a
Yeah.
slightly
Yeah.
more organized way of where the Sufi, much of previous Sufi discourse may just have, put up the wall between, what I can tell you in this book,
Hmm.
and you may learn, through through the words and the experience. I think
Hmm.
there's something more open and digested, maybe, about Ibn Arabi's approach, that he's taken experience and then told us a lot more, maybe, about what that means to really know in that way. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
why do you
I
think?
mean,
Yeah, why do you think that, like, the Ibn Arabi's approach is one that's particularly useful for thinking through the divine names?
oof. Uh, so to answer that, let me say first that I think the utility of phenomenology for us in the societies that we live in today, as opposed to being in the Middle Ages, is that we can afford to suspend, at least temporarily, theological preconceptions in order to investigate an experience. Uh, as a phenomenologist, one isn't negating theology or negating other, ways of interpreting, but the foremost concern is to first get close to how is the experience itself given. And I think that um, so even if and because, as you well know, like the classical Sufis will give quite elaborate and sophisticated commentaries on the meanings of what they say is given experientially. So they're doing both, right, all the time. There's a very complex hermeneutics going on with them, and we have the great benefit of being able to sort of freely inquire without uh, having to subscribe to any particular creed. If we're in a phenomenological attitude, at least we can set aside those concerns in order to as much as possible explore what is the meaning of the experience for the one reporting it. So Ibn Arabi, I think, for the names, well, number one, I think the Sufism in general, and Ibn Arabi and his followers in particular, always appeal to me personally because they are making these claims uh, as being based on presential or experiential knowing. Uh, which is different from a demand to subscribe to an idea. The way I hear it is more, here's a potential experience. So to me, that has a sense of openness in relation to what's said about the names. For example, in one of the books that we may be talking about, Tilim Sani's book about the Asmaul Husna, we can read it as at least potentially descriptive of experience and investigate it that way. As for the usefulness of the Akbari perspective, well, it's been said, I'm certainly not the first one to say this, that in a way you can look at Ibn al-Arabi as a kind of proto-phenomenologist, in a sense, in a particular way, in the sense that, number one, and you've already sort of pointed this out, there's an insistence on what a phenomenologist would call originary experience, like immediately given experience, rather than theoretical constructions. So, we were mentioning arifa or marifa earlier, and that's this kind of personal acquaintance. So that's a parallel, at least, between phenomenology and the Akbaris. And the second is that Ibn Arabi has such a nuanced and complex view of what's going on here in the world that we are living in. But one thing he will say, for example, in his probably most read book in translation, the Fusus al-Hikam, is, and this is a paraphrase, but it's in the chapter on Noah, if you really understood what people of all different religions are worshiping, you would understand that it's the same object of worship, essentially, even if the worshiper is unaware of it. So it's a very interesting claim, really radical, honestly. Now, I'm not arguing that he was making an equivalence between all the forms of worship. I'm not trying to make him into a modern pluralist or something like that in that sense. But for sure, he was making a big claim about the essential oneness of the object of worship in any act of worship. And that's fascinating. So I think, and that just is very rich and evocative, I think, for us today.
That definitely is. And I think it does go back to that Hadith Qudsi that perhaps he was working with and thinking that I am as my servant or worshiper thinks of me, is, authorizing that there may be different modes in which theology is different, the creedal, the belief, or the way in which the spiritual practice is organized to describe or characterize the object of worship, if that's how it's sort of thought of, to the extent that I think he may even give an example of like how the idolater is still worshiping me, meaning God. God's saying, well, the idolater is still worshiping me. They may not know it. They may have a different name. They may have a way of imagining it, but for them, I am that. And because the object of worship is what's more important, I'm not the object, the experience,
Absolutely.
the practice of the worship, because that's something fundamentally, I guess we might say, for all of these traditions, is it's valuing and understanding that worshipfulness is somehow a feature of humanity. It's a harnessing something within you that helps you. It's needed to be, to really be fully human. And that could take on some very different forms. So I'm not saying, you have to have a religion, you have to do this or that. But there is some component there that is recognized in that Akbarian phrase that gets back to that Hadith Qudsi that is important for the human and what it means to be human.
Yeah, and you remind me. There's in Jalaluddin Rumi's Masnavi, there's a story of Moses and a shepherd. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to paraphrase, of course, but so Moses is out in the world and he hears a shepherd praying, and the shepherd is saying something like, "Oh, I love you, God. I want to pull the fleas from your hair, and comb them and, bathe you," and talking to God. And Moses gets enraged, like, "How can you talk to the Lord this way?" Right?
Yeah.
And the shepherd becomes, of course, like, conscientious about it, goes off, And then God speaks to Moses in the poem and says, "Oh, Moses, like what were you thinking? Like, here is someone who really loves me. He's talking to me." Again, this is my paraphrase. And you go against that? Like, what are you doing? You know. So,
Yeah.
right, there's more twists and turns in that story. That's just the beginning of it, but just beautiful, right? Again, the form of worship, the object of worship. So lovely story, and I think the way that the figure of Moses or Musa is being used there. Again, if you get overly formal about the form of worship, then you're missing something too. In this case, that's how I
Yes.
read it.
Yes. Yes. Well, I mean, I teach that story too, so I'm so
Ah,
glad that you raised that because it's such a wonderful one where
uh-huh.
Moses is sort of chastised for interrupting the sincere
Yeah.
worshipful connection. Okay, it may be from a theological and conceptual perspective understood as incorrect or somehow contravenient, but that's the whole point, is that for the shepherd, the
Mm-hmm.
experience was very real, important, and meaningful. It was true worship. That's
Yeah.
something that's very important to recognize without, of course, it necessarily having to authorize some kind of modern pluralism. I mean, you could, if you want to develop it that way, fine. But
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be, for it still to be rooted in something that's very, he's not, Moses is not in this case a representative of a dissident Sufi, right? I mean, he's meant to sort of represent, yes, you did what you thought because you're a
Yeah.
prophet meant to come with a
Sure.
public message
Sure.
that you're, commanding the good and forbidding the evil. You're confronting idolatry or however,
Yeah.
right? Like this is like the public duties of the religion, but then there's
Yeah.
the spiritual experience that's there and is being, validated as
Yeah.
very important.
Yeah.
But I wanted to get back to this kind of question of the human and the divine in this relationship,
Yeah.
particularly through me as understood through the names in Akbarian kind of possibilities and perspectives,
Yeah.
because I think in a lot of Sufi theosophy from that period, and certainly in Muhyiddin Ibn al-Arabi's theosophy, the human being is a theomorphic being.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
is, it is somehow in a unique relationship with the spirit of the divine, that it shares a unique relationship that other parts of creation
Yeah.
are not having in the same way. And we understand in, the Quran tells us about nature that the angels and all created beings are saying the prayers, they're doing dhikr, they're doing
Mm-hmm.
invocations of God by their very nature. It's
Mm-hmm.
happening. So one might say, well, surely that's some kind of very fulfilled and realized intimate connection with the divine. How could there be, what is the unique and special relationship? And if it isn't that you're not doing dhikr all the time like the rest of nature, I mean, what's so great about that? I mean, after all. But it is this unique capacity for spiritual completion and realization, that there is something of a development, that the nature of the human is to um, reflect and maybe acquire even some of these divine attributes and characteristics. There is something that
Uh-huh.
was at points regarded as a hadith. Others dispute whether it's a real hadith, etc. But that
Right.
is that the uh, that the human beings are tasked with acquiring the attributes and
Uh-huh.
characteristics of
Uh-huh.
God, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what that could mean, I think the Akbarian approach gives us quite a lot
Yeah.
of reflection on this sort of what that process
Right.
could and must be.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, to go to take a step back, like, um, I think that what you're describing is human capacity to reflect, human capacity to sort of turn back from being immersed in the world in front of our faces and turn to what's most essential and most important.
Right.
I really love the wordplay that's in some of some of the classics about human being intrinsically forgetful, right?
Hmm.
Uh, so insan being, the one who's forgetful, right? So I think, and
You're,
the
you're,
counter,
you're alluding to the root of the word,
yeah,
insan, which is the human, and
yeah,
nasa is, to forget. So, in fact, actually, yes, that's right.
yeah. And I'm not an Arabist. I have no like deep knowledge in that area, but I know that that's played with in the literature, right?
About the
And
importance of remembrance and
yeah,
invocation.
yeah, yeah.
Yes.
Because as human beings, we normally get absorbed in things. This does seem to be something essentially human. And so remembrance in that sense is the counterpoint. It's like the move I need to choose to make
Hmm.
in order to wake up to what's more important, and maybe begin to free myself more fully from being fully entangled in this world. So, or from a relationship of entanglement with the world would be even more precise, because I don't think that for Ibn Arabi, just to make a larger point, it's not an ascetic tradition, strictly speaking. Just as Islam, like Judaism, are not monastic or ascetic traditions in that strict sense. There are ascetics in every religion, but it's like, no, be engaged in the world, but wake up in the world. So uh, at least that's my take.
Well, I mean, of course, there's always like periods of spiritual training and discipline that might involve and could
Right.
involve
Correct.
like
Correct.
regimes of fasting and so on. I mean, these are
Correct.
practices that are very common, but the
Right.
idea of full retreat from the world isn't
Right.
one that you find particularly authorized. There are some dissident traditions, but it's not really, you know, the
That's right.
mainstream of the traditions in both Judaism and Islam,
Yeah.
even if they're
Yeah.
spiritually oriented and want to turn you to remembering, recollecting, and focusing on what's important, um, beyond our worldly entanglements, they nonetheless don't imagine that the most healthy balance and relationship for that growth and self-realization would be conducted outside of society entirely, right? Like, there may
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
periods of training that are useful for you, but
Yeah.
it's not trying to imagine a whole category of worldly existence that refuses to engage with the world. Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm.
Which is why I would say, when I started with a little bit why we're called to feeling urgently that we need this at this moment,
Yeah.
it's not to escape the pain and
Yeah.
the inequalities and the injustices and the oppression of the world we inhabit and simply abandon it, give up on it, like the transhumanists. Why not just create a new mode of being? Why not just go to Mars? We'll, like, take all the resources of the earth, and after it's been completely destroyed, we'll, build a new, civilization and somewhere else. This is not, kind of the vision at all, and nor is it a political kind of, well, I can't do anything about the world. These problems are so great, so why don't I just withdraw into myself and seek and
Right.
find some kind of solipsistic happiness. Like, that's what I
That's
like
right.
and appreciate about this spiritual tradition, at least as we're talking about it and envisioning it, is that it is still engaged with the world. It's just you have to figure out the right way to engage with it and turn, I guess, maybe this is me channeling a little bit, turn some of this
Hmm.
trauma, the pain, the righteous anger that comes from seeing such injustice into something that doesn't destroy you, but actually enlivens you to act increasingly, in a way that expresses values of justice, values of mercy, and so on.
Yeah. Yeah. This is the kind of broadly, if we're speaking in an Islamic context broadly right now, the a Jewish tradition echo of that is Hillel's, like, if not me, who? If not now, when? right? This. So we're here,
Right.
we're here now.
Right, absolutely. Yes. That's I think another component, that's important for me in this. A lot of people who might come to this channel do so because I do talk about history, about global politics,
Hmm.
um,
Right, right.
and they are committed to that. But
Hmm.
I wanted to develop the series for myself to learn more about this tradition of the names, to really
Yeah,
explore them, to do that together with you in a way that would be, I think, also helpful and available to others, because I think it's an appropriate accompaniment to a life engaged in the world rather than
yeah, sure.
spirituality or mysticism as a involuted turn away from it. And that's
Yeah,
something I don't know if you've had a chance to uh, watch or listen, but on this channel I would just remind people of a very, I thought, interesting and touching to me, really meaningful to me episode in a discussion with Brett O'Shea from Revolutionary Left Radio, who's a Buddhist, and we talked about Marxian mysticism and left spirituality and how we understood those things. And while it may not resonate with everybody who takes just a very materialist understanding of how they should proceed and engage, with the world, which I share, a materialist kind of concept of power and so on. But we tried to suggest that there is a place for some spiritual growth, development, discipline, the resources that come from cultivating that, can be integrated with the deep commitments. In fact, we feel they should be, with the deep commitments for equality, justice, liberation, and the full realization of humanity and recognition of its dignity in yourself
yeah,
and in others.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well said. I think if we do this right, one should be able to. I mean, what we're embarking on here, one should be able to consider, to contemplate what these names stand for as an agnostic, and just like what do these stand for as essential human meanings, whether it's, again, justice, mercy, um, truthfulness, right? So the value of connecting with whatever that does end up meaning for a given person is already something that that could even be a non-theistic kind of remembrance, in a sense, if I could put it, in those terms. Because it's reminding oneself, like, what is my own ground in terms of what are my values, and not in isolation, but in relation to this, to others. Yeah. So
Yes. Yeah. Well, maybe we should mention a little bit about what we're going to be doing and some of the resources. So I mentioned that we will explore the 99 names. I mean, they're a set in a traditional devotional uh, tradition. Those are exist, but there are many more than those. I think our thought and plan was to maybe take a name in future episodes for a kind of discussion and reflection. We may follow the order devotionally. These are things that we haven't completely decided exactly. There are a few very important early ones, and I should have started this whole episode. I'd meant to say out loud Bismillah. Rahman Rahim was something that Muslims begin things with, and with every passage or chapter of the Quran begins with this invocation in the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate. And so those are very important ones because, of course, Allah, God, Ar-Rahman, the merciful, Ar-Rahim, the compassionate, they recur so often. So there's some high propensity ones that, of course, we'll have to deal with because they loom so large. But how we explore which names, there are groupings of names. There's 7 kind of groupings traditionally of names that are sort of categorized as sharing some features, and so they're seen as having some affinity with one another. We may dip into that and certainly want to talk about that. but the pathways are open, and we will, sort of go with inspiration, I think. But there will at least be one name that we discuss in upcoming episodes each. This is meant to be more of an overall introduction of the topic and getting to know us as hosts and why we're interested in this. But that's, I think, what we're planning. And I believe you had made some great suggestions as well for some resources that we're using. So I thought listeners, watchers may want to know, where are we getting some of the thoughts that come, of course, from experience and reflection on those experiences, but also there are writings that we are engaging with and consulting. And this is a huge body of literature that's out there. We've chosen a few things that reflect either the Akbarian kind of interpretive approach of theosophy in that particular orientation or school of Sufism. And so there are two texts that relate to that, one of which you've already had occasion to mention, which is Afif ad-Din at-Tlimsani's The Divine Names, which is translated into English and called A Mystical Theology of the Names of God in the Quran. That's a big volume, but it's an amazing resource. I think one of the things that's interesting, you may want to make some other remarks about why this is a useful and interesting text for us to use as a resource. But one thing that I would say about it that's different from other kinds of writings on the Asma al-Husna in the Muslim tradition, the beautiful names, is that he doesn't necessarily just follow a traditional devotional kind of list of the names. He has taken the approach of saying, where are the names in the Quran, and taking them up as they appear and as they are mentioned in the Quran. And that's kind of an interesting way. It expands the number of these attributes, and also it puts them in the context of the Quran and accomplishes something like, you might say, a sort of tafsir or interpretation of Quranic meaning. I don't know if you had any other things you want to mention. He's not he's an early Akbarian, maybe of the second generation. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So he, just for people who are familiar with Ibn al-Arabi, Tilimsani is the direct student of Ibn Arabi's successor, Sadruddin Kunawi. So this is just a second generation from Ibn al-Arabi. And I'm encountering this book just in the last couple of months for the very first time. So, and it's just very, I think it's a beautiful, great resource for what we're going to be doing. So,
yes. Well, I mean, I think the other one that we should mention as a kind of companion in this Akbarian tradition, of course, is Al-Qashani's sort of Sufi glossary, I believe is how it's translated. It's also been translated into English, and he is also an early Akbarian. And this is organized very differently as a glossary, as a word list, and discussions of, in a way, perhaps you could think of it as something like a study aid for those who are wrestling, you might say, with some of the unique terminology that is developed and introduced, or at least the specific ways in which these are used in Ibn al-Arabi and subsequent interpreters' writing. So it's like a glossary of Sufi technical terms is how it's been translated by Abdurrazak al-Qashani.
Right.
And he's also fairly early, as I remember. Yes, like maybe a student of Sadruddin Kunyawi too, as well. I think. I mean, so many of them.
One more in
maybe
between,
one generation after him, Tlimsani. So anyway, I don't have a copy of that book to show to people. I only have that, on PDF. But of course, there is also a classic that represents for me something like the earlier Sufi and theological kind of synopsis. And it's a very important book because it is by an important scholar in this tradition of Al-Ghazali and his Al-Maqsad al-Asna fi Sharh Asma Allah al-Husna. al-Ghazali on the, interpretation of the beautiful names of God. And this has also been translated into English, and they're also easily available in Arabic if you want to read them in that and consult them. But this is the book in English translation by David Burrell and Nazih Dahir that is also a great resource for what we might think of the theologically acceptable, side of the Sufi mystical tradition. So there are spiritual insights, but he also is careful to engage with the theological tradition. So some of the things that I might bring in that do relate to theological kind of context,
Right.
he's a good resource for that as
Oh, yeah.
well. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think something we may end up talking about further as the series continues is the similarities and differences between what could be described as a more dualist approach to viewing the names,
Mm-hmm.
a more non-dual or at least qualified non-dual approach to viewing the names, which the latter would be more Ibn al-Arabi, right? And that's a whole conversation. So maybe this is another teaser.
Yes.
But the essential question there is our existence strictly separate from that of God, or in a relatively more dual perspective, or do we not even possess, in an ultimate sense, our own existence, except as a kind of a place of manifestation for God within a field of multiplicity of this world? So that was a mouthful.
No, but these are like some of the crucial questions that do come up. I think you're right that taking a phenomenological approach allows us to bracket some of these. I mean, I am happy and enjoy bringing some of these in. I do want it to be useful for practicing Muslims who are not aware of some aspects of the resources and riches of their tradition, but yet also at the same time, the Akbarian kind of realizations and way of thinking and experiencing and expressing these do open up trajectories where some of the spiritual insights and value may be, universal for people who don't have to raise some of the questions or problems that come up that bedevil Muslim theologians, right? I mean, and I in my minor research to prepare some of the background of the Muslim traditional resources, you look at some of the hadith that I quoted, or at least referred to. I wouldn't say I quoted, because I was also sort of paraphrasing as well in some cases. There's a modern hesitation or concern, about interpreting these in a very narrow and restrictive way to make sure that nobody gets the idea that there might be some interplay between the human and the divine, because there's a deep investment, of course, at some level of the conceptualizing of the creator and the created, right? I mean, but what I think is fascinating about at least the aspiration of Sufism, let's put it that way. Let's say the experience and the aspiration of Sufism has always been somehow to connect across that divide that is, when crossed, then maybe not even seem real, right? Okay, so that's one way to think about it. We don't experience it that way in our daily life, but that's because we haven't necessarily opened ourselves up to those true spiritual realities, and we're still caught and entangled in our dunyawi insan, forgetting our real kind of spirit. Let's just recall for everyone, it's a Qur'anic verse, where before human beings took the shape of Adam, Hawa, and their progeny, their souls were created. The Quran, sort of refers and alludes to something like this eternal kind of nature of existence where, God said, "Am I not your Lord?" To these souls or spirits or whatever it was that human beings were before they took on the shape and the form that we experience ourselves in today. Uh, and we said yes. So there was some kind of primordial recognition that we're trying to, in some sense, always realize in this current situation that we're in, which isn't to say to leave it behind or transcend it, but how to experience something of that immediate recognition of the divine, in this kind of form, and that is the realization of what it means to be human, right? I mean, human beings. This is for the Muslims out there, okay? The Quran says also that human beings were created. This is when we talked about the theomorphic kind of condition of the nature of humanity, of the human, um, to be khulafa fil ard, to be stewards or somehow responsible. Yeah, and in right balance and relation with. And of course, the angels said from the very beginning, they said, "Oh, you're going to put somebody in the world that you've created who will, spill blood and spread corruption." And all we've done since then is prove the angels correct. So the task at hand, in some ways, is, can we actually fulfill what the divine nature, or at least the divine purpose of
Mhm.
our theomorphic existence in this world, was meant to be.
Mhm. Yeah, well said. And I mean, and I think that, so some of us were, raised with already the framework within which there's a kind of, let me say, the assumptive framework or the nurturing framework as kids, were within which we receive the messages that there's already this direction to our existence. And then what you're describing is kind of a, a path of validating more fully the meaning of that, the alast, or the "Am I not your Lord?" Right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and I think, to me, likewise, as a fellow traveler, someone who doesn't have any of that background could be on a parallel journey, which is, okay, I don't arrive at this inquiry into like the essences of existence or the names with any kind of assumptions about it, but I'm still trying to validate: is there an essential reality that transcends me but somehow informs what I am, that can be verified personally? Say, so equal opportunity
Yes, yes.
journey in my
That's
book.
right. No, well, that's right. And so, I mean, I just mentioned Al-Ghazali because, I will
Oh yeah,
have occasion to reference him
absolutely.
because that connects with the historic tradition. But I think the point that you were just raising, Mark, is so important and is such a guiding purpose for this series of explorations and conversations and the journey that we hope to go on and bring at least some of you along with us as well, is that it has to be relevant. The only purpose is for this. I'm a historian, so of course I love, and I'm a medieval historian, even worse. So I love going back to a distant past, and that can be its own escape, of course, if it's done not with any sense of its relevance or how it might inform and be helped to inform, not by crude application, but by extending a living tradition to the circumstances we find ourselves today. That's the only reason why going into these traditions or studying history in the past is really relevant, is how we might use it to inform our world now. And so, that's great to have the tradition, but it also needs to uh, be informed by the texture of contemporary reality and those conditions and be meaningful to all manner of people today. And that's why we're doing it kind of, I think, the way we're doing it. And that just reminds me to remember to introduce also a resource that I think is useful and helpful. People may want to consult. I'm certainly engaging with it to some extent as well, which was put together by people who were psychologists and Sufis and part of other distinct traditions, but that they brought it together in their exploration of the divine names. And this book is called A Sufi View. Well, it's Physicians of the Heart, a Sufi view of the 99 names of Allah. And so this is a book that is more contemporary, which is an attempt to try and bring some of the resources of the divine names to people's experience and challenges today as a way of exploring what it can be to be human and to connect with the divine. So what you were just saying, I think, is important. And you're also a psychologist, and your approach may be a little bit different from some of the psychologists in this book, but given the phenomenological, philosophical interest. But I think that's also, I'm mentioning this so that people know that there are some resources available out there that we will also be engaging to make it meaningful today. So I don't know if there's any much more we should say. If there's anything else you would like to add, now is a good time. But I don't know how much more there is to say before we get into the actual names, which I'm very much looking forward to now that we've kind of introduced this to listeners and viewers. Okay, well, look forward to something like a monthly. We'll try and keep to that sort of a schedule. Once a month, a new episode in this series on the divine names. And share this video to people who you think it might benefit and who might be interested. And subscribe to the channel so that you can be updated when new episodes in this series come out. And of course, if you can, we do have an editor, although, who knows where we'll go with that. But if you can support us, that, I believe in a fair wages for fair work. So if you can support us and help us, you can go to patreon.com/Adnan Hussein to, support the channel. But of course, the goal here is to make these resources, whether they're historical, intellectual, political education, and the kinds of discussions we have, or in this case, spiritual resources and, insights in a tradition of spirituality that we feel might have something to contribute to your own spiritual growth and fulfillment, especially in this age when the project of being human is under so much attack and threat that we ought to pay attention to what it means to connect the human to the divine in terms of fulfilling that Akbarian notion of being a complete person. It's often translated in Insan al-Kamil as the perfect person, or even worse, the perfect man, But Insan al-Kamil meant to be a universally whole and integrated and complete person. So we wish you and yours, health, spiritually and physically, on this journey. I hope you'll join us for our next episode and for this exciting series. On behalf of Marc and myself, we will really appreciate your comments and your feedback, your insights, and we look forward to this dialogue going forward. Until next time, peace and solidarity.